What's up, everybody? It's saying we're live. Let me go over here and check it on the Facebook before I bring my guest up today. It's going to be a fun show. Hold on. Boom. Yeah, looks pretty good. It's going to be a fun show. A July 4th special. We do this every year. We always take different angles at it, different perspectives. We also always do a little something different, but it's a little more lighthearted as far as deep dives, but it's a serious topic. We live in I think we live in the best country ever, and it was not by mistake. And I think we need to remember that. But we're going to have some fun facts, some probably facts you didn't know, and some commentary. And it's going to be with our friend Eric Buchanan. We're going to bring him up in three, two, one. Eric Buchanan, how in the world are you, sir?
Hey, Clint, good to see you. Happy Independence Day.
Happy Independence Day, dude. Now, last year, didn't you have a hat or something or glasses? You had something funky last year.
I may have had some glasses last year. Today, I'm wearing my Home of the Brave t-shirt
Attaboy.
from the baseball field in the middle of Iowa where the if you build it, they will come field it.
Field of Dreams, yeah.
Yeah, the Field of Dreams.
I've shaved USA in my chest hair right here. Nothing's more American than that, buddy.
How big are the letters and how deep is the hair around the
You
letters?
don't worry about that. You know what? There's some stuff
think
that's just none of your business.
Our audience might appreciate a view of that if you want to take your shirt off.
Oh, they would not. I'm old. Hey, so we're going to do some different stuff today. We're going to read a little bit from the Declaration of Independence. We're going to give some opinions and narratives. We're going to share some fun facts. I've got a couple facts. I'm doing something on During the Break podcast this month, a short did you know fact about our country's founding for 31 straight days. I'm 4 days into it. Now, that means I've got a few things I have discovered that are really some fun things, I think. But how do you want to start this bad boy today, buddy?
Well, ask me a couple of those, and then I'd like to. One of my favorite traditions is the idea of reading the Declaration of Independence, and I don't want to do that all at once. I think we should do it in bits and pieces, and we won't read the whole thing, but read some of the key parts of it and talk about that. I've got some trivia for you, and then I'd like to. At some point, we can actually do a little bit of a mix in some current events and talk about some a little bit of narrative and commentary today, a little bit of opinion. 4th of July celebration stuff. So
all right. So Eric, I'll just throw a fact out there that I learned that I'm sure you know because you're the history guru, dude. You ready?
Okay, try me.
Hey, did you know the British planned to assassinate George Washington?
I heard about that. You know how I knew about that?
How?
Because I listened to your podcast yesterday. I had never heard that story before.
Is it not fascinating?
Yeah, that was like early on, wasn't it? Like
so here it is. I'll just read it. Read it real quick. It's one of the most interesting facts is they had the British. Let me just go ahead. Before the Declaration of Independence was even signed, a secret committee uncovered an assassination plot against George Washington. It was going to be carried out by one of his bodyguards, Thomas Hickey. Thomas Hickey was the only guy actually put to death for treason or for the plot. The mayor of New York, the governor of New York were supposedly in it, and that committee is basically the founding, the beginnings of the modern day CIA.
So they trace their history back through the OSS all the way back to that committee. That's pretty cool. Yeah, I like that.
There's one of mine. I got a couple more that I think are pretty cool, but
we'll throw some out there. Here's mine for you.
All right.
What presidents died on the 4th of July and what presidents were born on the 4th of July?
Okay. Died Thomas Jefferson and not Coolidge. No, because they asked about each other. I can't remember. And was Calvin Coolidge the one born on the 4th of July?
Calvin Coolidge was born on the 4th of July. He was born on the 4th of July, 1872.
Okay. I can't remember the people. I want to Benjamin.
There were actually 3 that died on July 4th.
Oh, okay.
So Thomas Jefferson and John Adams both died on July 4th, 1826, on the 50th anniversary of the Declaration of Independence. And supposedly Thomas Jefferson's last words were "Adams lives." And they had famously been friends during the time of the Revolution. Then they were political opponents, and then after they both had been president, they became friends again and wrote a lot of letters to each other. The other one who died on July 4th was James Monroe.
Okay, I hadn't remembered that one. I want to be honest. Of the 4, I got 2 right. I'm pretty good.
Here's another follow-up. What was really famous about Calvin Coolidge besides just being born on July 4th? Having to do with our country's birthday?
Was he the first president to make an official holiday?
He was the president on the 150th sesquicentennial anniversary of the United States. So in 19 he was not only born on the 4th of July, but he got to give he was president on the 150th anniversary of the United States in 1926 on July 4th, and his July 4th speech from 1926 is pretty famous, and I'm going to read a couple excerpts from that later on too. So
Okay.
yeah,
Very
that'll
cool.
be fun.
All right, so this is the problem doing stuff with Eric. I have all mine kind of saved on screenshots. Now, some of it I remember, but Eric just pulls stuff, out of his lawyer butt and goes, "Look at this Constitution stuff," and I'm like, "Dadgummit." All right, what do you want to do next? You want to keep giving facts, or do you want to read a little
I
bit?
want to read a little bit of the Declaration of Independence, and let's chat about that for just a second, and
Absolutely.
then we'll do some more trivia. All right, and kind of let's do this just trivia about the first line of the Declaration of Independence says, "In Congress, July 4th, 1776," and then goes from there. When was the Declaration of Independence actually voted on?
Oh, because it was signed. I think some people signed it on the 2nd and the 4th, and then the rest in August. Wasn't it voted on? I don't know. I would say the 2nd, but I'm gonna probably go back a year even or 6 months. I can't
No, no,
remember.
no. It was only 2 days.
Okay, then
So,
July 2nd.
the representative from Virginia, whose last name was Lee, uh, had brought a resolution that basically said, "We're going to declare independence." And once Virginia was behind independence, it became a real thing. And they spent earlier in the summer working to vote on that. But part of the resolution that Virginia proposed was that it had to be unanimous, that all 13 colonies had to agree to vote for independence. And there was a whole summer of debate. Pennsylvania was divided. And what would happen is, for example, Pennsylvania had 3 delegates, and Benjamin Franklin was one of them. He wanted independence. There was another guy who did not want independence, and the third guy was like, Mr. I want to make everybody happy, so whoever talked to him last, he would agree with, and so he was bouncing back and forth.
Oh, Mitt Romney. Gotcha. My
and
bad.
and
I'm
and and
kidding.
New York wasn't sure if they wanted to attend. Georgia didn't have anybody there for a long time. All kinds of drama leading up to this idea that we were not going to declare independence if it wasn't unanimous. Get all 13 colonies to say we are now independent states. They voted, and it finally passed unanimously, all 13 colonies, on July 2nd, 1776. And John Adams famously said, "This is the day we're going to celebrate with picnics and fireworks and parades." Except the reason everybody picked July 4th is because that's right there at the top of the Declaration. Few people signed it on July 4th. Most people, the famous signature day when everybody signed it was
Was in
on
August. Yeah.
August 2nd. One last trivia question before I start reading. How many people signed it?
56.
Wow. Yep. Very good, Clint.
Actually, I
Very good.
got a trivia question. You're gonna start listening. He's a
Yep,
little
yep,
jealous.
yep.
I'm starting to know some shit over here. Hey, I've got a trivia question about the signing coming up in a minute that
Okay.
that you may not know, my friend. You may
Let
not
me
know it.
read this.
Yeah,
Let's read the first paragraph.
go for it.
In Congress, July 4th, 1776, the unanimous declaration of the 13 United States of America. When in the course of human events it becomes necessary for one people to dissolve the political bands which have connected them with another, and to assume among the powers of the earth the separate and equal station to which the laws of nature and of nature's God entitle them, a decent respect to the opinions of mankind requires that they should declare the causes which impel them to the separation. I like reading that opening paragraph because that basically is Thomas Jefferson writing, here's why we're doing a Declaration of Independence. Because we think that it is time to explain this to the world, why our God-given right to rule ourselves and to stand among the nations of the earth is necessary, and it requires an explanation. I love that opening paragraph. We'll talk some more about what he says after that in a minute.
Okay. You want me to give a fact, or you got something else?
Yeah, you asked me a trivia question or a fact.
Well, it's not a trivia question. Something that I read through this and I'd not really thought about it, even though you have said it a couple of times. I don't think people understand when George Washington gave his power back to Congress, how how instrumental that was and different it was back in the day. I want to just read you this, and you tell me if you agree with this or not. It says on December 23rd, 1783, Washington strode into the State House at Annapolis, Maryland, surrendering his military commission to a grateful Congress. In front of gathered congressmen, he declared, "Having now finished the work assigned me, I retire from the great theater of action and bidding an affectionate farewell to this august body under whose orders I have so long acted. I here offer my commission and take my leave of all the employments of public life." And basically, what they're saying is history is full of Julius Caesars, the Oliver Cromwells, Napoleon. Yeah, all these military giants who had really not intended, but all of a sudden they had all this power, and they just said, you know what? I've got the army, I've got the power, I've got the reputation. People are following me. I'm going to keep the power for myself for a while. And this author of this was like, I think people need to understand that was not really normal back then.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. People, if you're going to know anything about George Washington, he had the opportunity to become king. People pushed for him to become king. He turned that down. He established the principle in American history that the army is subservient to the civilian government. That he said, we are working for Congress. There were even conversations that his men had when they were not getting paid toward the end of the war. His officers basically wanted to rebel and go take on Congress. And I don't have the speech in front of me, but there's a famous speech that he gives a little while before, like a year or so before what you just read, where his senior officers wanted to actually take the army in and hold Congress hostage until they all got paid. And he gave this very compelling speech about fighting for a country and for ideals and for a republic, and the idea that we were fighting for Congress and for our own independence, but also to have the rule of law. In that speech, he gave those concepts, and at first, his officers, basically ignored him. They were so pissed off that they weren't getting paid that they didn't really listen to him, and they weren't buying his arguments at this point. He takes a moment's break, and he pulls out an envelope, and he has a letter that was written and that he wants to read just a short passage of. And at that moment, he reaches into his pocket and says, "Gentlemen, you'll have to excuse me. I have also given my eyesight to my country." And he pulls out his spectacles so he can read the envelope. That and his men are so moved, because back then you did not put on your spectacles in public. It was just not done. If you needed spectacles to read, that was a real sign of weakness. And so when he pulled out his spectacles in front of his officers and said, I'd like to read this to you, gentlemen, it brought his men to tears. And that,
because it showed he was humble.
That change, and the sacrifices he gave, and that totally changed the mood of the crowd, and they decided not to attack Congress. So, and then shortly after that, he resigned, like you said, and told Congress, like, I've been working for you. And then he also established the idea that after 2 terms, that the president doesn't serve anymore, and you step down from power. And that's so huge. All those things are such great examples, just one time after another. If he established these principles in practice in the United States to do these things the right way, when around the world, like we already talked about, only around that same time, Napoleon basically gets elected to be a leader for a while, and he turned himself into an emperor. I mean, that happened at the exact same time period, like within a decade.
All right, you want to read something? Or you got a did you know fact of your own that you want to throw out to me, sir?
Let me read something. This is not from the Declaration of Independence. I want to we have done in some other shows recommended reading for other people.
Yeah.
One of my recommended reading for people is, we talked a minute ago about Calvin Coolidge. He was born in July 4th, 1872. He happened to be president when the United States turned 150 in 1926.
Okay.
And he was able to give America's sesquicentennial speech. And it's a long speech. It's worth reading. I'm not going to read all of it, but one of the sections, I just wanted to read this briefly.
Okay.
He says this during the speech: amid all the clash of conflicting interests, amid all the welter of partisan politics, every American can turn for solace and consolation to the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution of the United States, with the assurance and confidence that those 2 great charters of freedom and justice remain firm and unshaken. Whatever perils appear, whatever dangers threaten, The nation remains secure in the knowledge that the ultimate application of the law of the land will provide an adequate defense and protection. I love that. I hope that's still true today. That's what bothers me about people who are attacking the Constitution or attacking the Bill of Rights or attack the founding of the nation. Whatever side you're on, whether you're a Republican or a Democrat, libertarian, progressive, whatever, that we as Americans should all take solace in the fact that we have the rule of law and guaranteed freedoms in the Constitution and in the Bill of Rights.
Well, and you know, this isn't written down, but just my commentary on that. I think, again, I don't think this, man, maybe they do. I just don't think we remember how unique it is, not just to write the things down, but then to have so many people agree to live by them. I mean, that's, to me, is now, you know, we have military and we have the police. And if you step out of line, there's a immediate conflict with whatever. I get that. I'm just saying, when they formed this, to have a bunch of people go, okay, well, we're going to trust our fellow Americans to all live by these same rules. That was really unique, I think. And it was kind of, I would imagine, scary, because, you know, we didn't really have anything other than monarchs and kings and, you know, military might, all that. So I think that's a pretty unique thing too.
Let me immediately follow that up with something, Clint, because that's exactly right. So the idea we all live by the same principles and laws, this is also from Calvin Coolidge's speech. It was not because it was proposed to establish a new nation, but because it was proposed to establish a nation on new principles, that July 4th, 1776 has come to be regarded as one of the greatest days in history.
Okay, real quick. So one of your favorite quotes ever that I love on this day: "Freedom now has a home."
Yeah. So yeah, it was the Marquis de Lafayette when he found out about the Declaration of Independence. Freedom finally has a country.
I mean, there you go. It's kind of the same thing, right? It's not just a new country; it's a country founded on new principles. I love that.
We are a country that is founded on life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. We are a nation of an idea. Yeah. One difference the United States has from almost every other country in the world is every other country, you think that there are basically a homogenous cultural unit. They may have had some immigrants in the 20th and 21st century, but that's not the founding of their country. Russia is full of Russians. China is full of Chinese. And those are big countries, by the way. Think about all the small countries. Kenya is full of Kenyans. Sudan is full of Sudanese. The idea of almost every country in history is because they have cultural similarities. They all were raised in similar cultures, raised with, then, you know, they look alike, basically, in most countries. The United States is as opposite from that as we can be. We are a country that we came together to have the ideas of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness.
Well, it's the pursuit part. It's not guaranteed happiness. We're guaranteed the right to pursue. So when everybody goes, we have a right for, well, that's not it. We have the right to pursue it, not the government to pursue it on our behalf. Commentary by Clint. I will say this. That's, to your point, one of my anecdotal stories is that's why I love the Olympics, because when all the teams are walking in, I know there are teams that have different looks. I'm not saying that we're the only one, but we are the melting pot. I mean, if you were to take a snapshot, screenshot it, and send it to me and go, take the flags off the jerseys, pick the American out. You can't pick it out by looking. You can't say, oh, that's the American, because you don't know. White, black, Chinese, tall, short, muscular, thin, man, woman, you don't know. And that's what I like about it.
Yeah, I think I can think of a couple of examples of how that was great. Remember when we were kids in the Olympics, in, I guess it was 1972. Anyway, the two skiers are standing next to each other, and the Swedish skier looks at the American skier and then looks at her name and his name. They're both named Svensson. You remember that commercial? And she looks over and she goes, "You Svensson? Me Svensson too."
Yeah.
She was the Swedish one and he was the American.
That's
the
right.
idea that we sent Jesse Owens to go over and break records and win gold medals in Hitler's Berlin in 1936.
There's a comedian, because I don't want to keep this thing moving. There's a comedian that's got one of my favorite bits. Go listen to it. It's Bill Burr, who I love. Bill Burr, very politically incorrect. He goes, but you talk about, he goes, can you imagine Hitler on the ride home after those Olympics, how quiet and angry Hitler must have been, walking into it. We will show them. And on the way home, like, no one talking, everybody pissed off. I think that's pretty funny. I think that's a funny way to look at it.
And there's so many, I mean, just think of the ice skaters that we've had that are every different race. Just
Hey, can I give a quick piece of trivia?
Yeah.
All right. Small number of women fought for the Continental Army. Did you know that, Eric Buchanan?
I know there was Molly Pitcher.
Oh, no. There's this girl named Deborah Sampson, sir, who disguised herself in male clothing, masquerading as Robert Shurtleff. She fought for 2 years, was injured multiple times, and considered an effective soldier. As a matter of fact,
they gave her a pension later.
She was honorably discharged from the hospital, and her husband petitioned the government for soldier's pay and received it.
There's a story about her that she was wounded, and in order to not have people find out that she was a woman, she removed a musket ball from her leg herself.
Yeah.
So that she didn't have to go to the hospital.
Yeah, that's pretty cool.
She was a badass.
Yeah. All right, I've got a couple more, but you keep going.
Let's bounce around a little because I'd like to let me read one more thing from the Declaration of Independence. I'd also like to get a little bit of current commentary just on something interesting to me.
Okay.
Next paragraph. So after the opening paragraph of the Declaration, which Thomas Jefferson basically says, "Hey world, we're coming. Here comes the United States, and these are the reasons we're becoming a nation." Here he gets to the meat of it. "We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, that to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed, that whenever any form of government becomes destructive of these ends, it is the right of the people to alter or abolish it, and to institute a new government, laying its foundation on such principles and organizing its powers in such form as to them shall seem most likely to affect their safety and happiness." Yeah. So at that point, I mean, one of the discussions we can have about the Declaration of Independence is, does it count as a controlling legal document? We have the Constitution that sets up the rights and privileges of the power of government, and what limited powers it has, and what the rights of the people in the states are. Can we say as Americans that we can cite to the Declaration of Independence and say that government must derive its just powers from the consent of the government? Otherwise, that's not the United States government. That's a requirement. That's what our Declaration of Independence says. That they cannot interfere with our rights of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, because those are guaranteed by us to us all by the Declaration of Independence.
I look at the Declaration, and this may be wrong, I look at that as the business plan, and then the Constitution as the systems and processes by which the business plan is achieved.
Yeah, I like that. I mean,
that's one. They have to almost go hand in hand, and one without the other becomes a little less powerful and loses the air quote why behind it. As a business owner, as a country, why are we starting this country? Here is our business plan. Here's our overall overarching outline, and here's how we're going to do it. And that's the Constitution.
Yeah. So let me read to you what Calvin Coolidge said about the Declaration of Independence in this part of his speech. What is the role of the Declaration of Independence? And he says, "It was the fact that our Declaration of Independence contained these immortal truths, was the political action of a duly authorized and constituted representative public body in its sovereign capacity, supported by the force of general opinion and by the armies of Washington already in the field, which makes it the most important civil document in the world."
I think you don't get to the Constitution without the Declaration, because the Declaration establishes the who we are and the why we're doing it. And then the Constitution derives its direction from that. So I agree.
Yep, absolutely.
So I just want Calvin Coolidge to know, as he's listening down on this,
that you agree with him,
that my big brain concurs, sir. All right, you want me to do trivia, or you got something else you want to bring up?
Let's do trivia, and then we'll.
So, did you know Paul Revere was a dentist?
No, he was a silversmith.
Okay, you ready for this?
Or maybe I guess it's part of his
no. You've already given your answer. You've given your answer, attorney.
that would make the
judge. I'm muting
his main job was he was a silversmith.
I just muted his mic, ladies and gentlemen. He can't talk anymore. All right, here we go. Paul Revere is most famous for his midnight ride to inform the patriots of the coming of the British. Yet he is also talented, silversmith, whose hobby was dentistry. As the war continued, he was asked to identify a body badly decomposed of a soldier they thought he knew. And he checked the man's mouth and found the teeth that he had wired in. And he actually confirmed that was the body of the soldier that could not be identified. Historians believe it's the first instance of a body being identified using dental forensics.
Oh, wow.
There you go. There you go, folks. And I didn't know this one. Did you know we had invisible ink back then?
I did. It was lemon juice was most commonly used.
Yeah, it says, well, it was ferrous sulfate mixed with water during the war created the invisible ink. I had no idea. They would write between lines in the back of books. Anyway, I didn't know that. All right, back to you. I mean, I've got 2 or 3 other ones, dude. I'm telling you, this is fascinating stuff.
So, quick trivia question here. Mm-hmm. What was the date that George Washington crossed the Delaware River?
He did it twice. Thank you very much. I know that for a fact. One was December, Christmas Eve.
Or New Christmas Day.
Christmas Day.
It was Christmas Day. So he crossed on December 25th. So it was the night of the 25th, 26th.
Okay.
And the reason they did that is because the Hessians celebrated all day Christmas Day. The holiday was not just Christmas Eve, Christmas morning. It was for grown-ups. You drank beer and grog and rum all day on Christmas Day, and the next morning you might be hungover. And that's when George Washington and his troops got to Trenton in the morning when the Germans were just waking up.
Said, we'll welcome to America, boys and girls.
And that was, by the way, Christmas Day, 1776. So it was only a few months after the signing of the Declaration of Independence. And it was the first significant victory after the siege of Boston had been lifted. We were on a little bit of roll. Lexington and Concord resulted in the siege of Boston. Boston was pretty miserable for a while. That spring, George Washington, with the help of Henry Knox and his artillery, broke the siege of Boston, kicked the British out. They never came back. They went to New York. And then but after that, George Washington got his butt kicked around New York. And then, so he crossed the Delaware that winter to win one more battle before the enlistment of all his men expired at the end of the year. That's why it was a big deal to go do that on Christmas.
One of the things that I kind of think I knew, but forgot while I've done these podcasts, is that the actual Lexington and Concord, that actually happened almost like a year before we did the Declaration of Independence. I mean, that the war basically started well before we declared our independence. I mean, we were already fighting amongst the British or with the British already. Hey, real quick, 2 things, Eric. Okay. Did you know that British soldiers also acted in plays while they were in New York City?
Yes, I heard that on a podcast the other day.
Yes.
They kept themselves busy.
Yeah, and what year was the Star Spangled Banner became our national anthem? This one surprised me. I did not know this.
What year was it adopted? It was written in 1814.
Yep.
But I don't know what year it was adopted.
1931.
Oh, wow.
Yes. I was like, 1873 or something like that. Nope. 1931. The Star Spangled Banner became the United States national anthem in 1931. It was written in September 14th of 1814. All right, so back to you.
So before time gets totally away, let's talk about a current topic. For people who are interested in what's going on politically and have heard our commentary on this stuff, yesterday you and Matthew and I had a pretty good podcast conversation about the affirmative action Supreme Court case that came out last week, and it's the Students for Fair Admissions versus like the president and board of Harvard or whatever the official name of that case is. And we had a good talk about that. And anybody who wants to listen, I would recommend going back and listening to that podcast. One case we didn't get to, and I just wanted to kind of mention this. You and I and Matthew have talked in past in our podcast about the theme of whether or not there's going to be a significant shift anytime soon in the relationship between the federal government, the states, and the people, and basically the size of the administrative state.
Right.
And we talked about George Friedman's book, the Storm Before the Calm, and that's one of his theories, is that the United States had almost no power at the federal level and almost no administrative state in the first 80 years. And then the Civil War changed it, so the federal government became more important. And for about 80 years after that, it was important, but it still didn't take over power from the states, and it didn't have a big central administrative state. And then in the 1930s, under FDR, the administrative state really started growing. The New Deal programs were put in place, and throughout the second half of the 20th century, we had this big move where basically administrative agencies could do what they want to. And you and I have talked several times about, for example, the Chevron case, which is a case from the 1980s that basically says if Congress passes a law giving an agency general power over something, then when the agency says, "Oh, we've got the power to do this, this, and this," then the courts say that they're supposed to give deference to the agency in interpreting their own powers.
Okay.
Which basically means they've got to, as long as it's a reasonable interpretation, they get all the power in the world. And Congress has also gotten in the habit of granting to agencies pretty broad powers, so the agencies are almost powers unto themselves.
Okay, I just want to stop. I want to stop you for a minute because you always give me shit for going down rabbit holes emotionally and rants. You're so smart. Your rants are actually constitutional and court deep dives. That's what happens with you. You start going down this thing, and next thing you know, I'm getting a timeline of court dates. And the difference is mine are based on emotion, and yours are based off facts. So I wish people could see me smiling because, dude, I love it. I'm like, okay, Eric's got his own little rabbit hole right now. He's setting it up for. Back to you, sir.
To circle it back around. So the Supreme Court decided last week that President Biden's loan forgiveness program was a violation of federal law, that he did not have the authority to do that under the HEROES Act. And so just to remind people so Joe Biden basically said he was going to give $10,000 of student debt relief to almost everybody under the program and another $10,000 to anybody who had been a Pell Grant recipient. And basically before that happened, we had Nancy Pelosi very clearly saying that the president didn't have the power to grant student loan relief. We had Joe Biden as a campaign promise saying, "I'll try to get Congress to pass something. I don't think I'll be able to do as president, but I'll try to push for it." And basically there was political agreement that it couldn't be done just by the president saying so,
right?
That it had to be passed by Congress. But then once Joe Biden got into office, one of the things he did was he announced the student debt relief. Now, of course, there's lots of people in favor of it because, hey, people have student debt, and it might be a good idea for those people with student debt. It does mean that it becomes a debt of the United States that the money is not going to be paid back, and so it basically means the rest of us taxpayers are going to pay for it. So people who politically are not in favor of it will say that's not debt forgiveness, it's debt transfer. It's making the rest of us pay for it. The Supreme Court came out and said, well, let's look at this law that the president's saying he has the authority to do this. And it says under this law that was passed right after 9/11 that for military members and other people, so it's supposed to be military members, but it says and for other people, that in the case of war or other national emergency, that the president and the agency, basically the administrative agency, has the power to modify someone's student loans. And so what the Supreme Court did is they dug into this and they said, well, what does that mean to modify? And the liberals said, look, if the agency interprets the word modify to mean entirely wipe out $400 billion in debt and to completely change the program to essentially make it a blanket rule for everybody, doesn't that fit within the word modify? I mean, what does modify, if they get the right to interpret that under Chevron, they can say, well, modified means that pretty broadly. And this is something I thought was just really worth mentioning this week. So Amy Coney Barrett, one of the Supreme Court justices that was appointed recently, basically gave the example of this. You got to read the words in context. And if you read the words in context, read the words the way they're set out there, she gave the example of, if you're leaving your kids with a babysitter and you give your babysitter a credit card and said, now you guys have fun tonight, what does that mean? Does that mean the babysitter can do whatever he or she wants with that credit card? It doesn't mean she can take the kids in the car, drive down to Florida, and go to an amusement park for 4 days. It means she can buy a nice dinner and maybe rent a movie or something. So that was one great quote from Amy Coney Barrett. And the other one, Justice Roberts said, we've got to be careful about the way we use modify. Because if you use modify as broadly as they want us to use the word modify, it could be, there's a famous expression previously used by the Supreme Court that if you use modify that way, you could also describe that the French Revolution modified the status of the nobility of France.
It makes sense. It makes sense.
Yeah.
Hey,
so
I got a question.
How do we tie that back in today real quick?
Yeah.
when we see what happens in America, we have the Constitution, we have these founding documents, we have the Declaration of Independence, and I submit we're at the end of an 80-year cycle, and we're going to see a Supreme Court for a while that is going to pay more attention to what the Constitution says, pay more attention to what the Declaration of Independence says, and ensure that some of our founding principles are more brought into the public conversation about what powers government has and doesn't have.
Okay. I want to add my 2 cents to this, and I want to keep it moving with a couple more trivia things. And I know you might want to read, but real quick, one of the things that frustrated me about, it doesn't matter who the president was, a president this time just happens to be Joe Biden. When he comes out and he doesn't get the court decision around the student loan, especially, and he calls it a rogue court, not in touch with the people. And I'm like, listen, you were saying it, your people in your party were saying how this is unconstitutional. Be consistent with your words so you don't divide the American people further. That I'm not saying all of it's on you, man, but when you come out and say this is a bad decision, instead of just saying, you know what, we tried, I understand how the court got to this decision. That's kind of what I thought, but I had to put a Hail Mary in there because that's what I promised I would try to do. I would have respected that. But when for years you come out and say that this is unconstitutional and you bash any other president that's using executive orders this way, when that happens and you don't get what you want and you start threatening the court, I then know you're just being a damn politician, and it bothers me. Now, I have a solution to this that nobody's going to like, and then we want to move on to trivia. Why don't they just go back and take 2 years, prorate the debt, and say we're just going to remove those 2 years? Because a lot of times we were told we couldn't go to our jobs. We were told we didn't have to pay rent. I wouldn't mind if they went back and said, okay, those 2 years, those payments are gone. You start back now, and that's removed from your debt. So if you owe $20,000, now you only owe $17,500, and you're back on your payments.
So I think the short answer is that might be a good idea, but the Supreme Court basically said that needs to come from Congress. The president.
That's what I'm saying, though. I'm saying, I wasn't saying where it came from. I'm just saying a solution might be we'll just remove those 2 years of payments because the government a lot of times did tell you you can't go to work.
Yeah, and I think that's a fair way to argue that Congress should step in and give some debt relief to specific people.
Discuss it, yeah.
But the idea that the president can do it without the authorization of Congress totally violates the Constitution.
All right, it's sometimes said, Eric Buchanan, that a woman signed the Declaration of Independence. Did you know that?
So there was a woman who was a clerk, and she was one of the people who copied it over and had it printed up, and I cannot remember her name.
All right, you want me to give you some time?
No, I won't be able to remember her name.
She was a colonial era journalist. She was also the postmistress of Baltimore, Maryland. Her family were printers and newspaper publishers. And if you take a close look at the bottom of the early version of the document, it will reveal the words Baltimore in Maryland, printed by Mary Catherine Goddard. Yeah, she was the one that printed it. And that's why they say that sometimes.
I've heard that story, but I don't remember her name.
I got to give you one of my favorite ones.
Okay.
The short one. So in 1776, July 9th, a copy of the Declaration of Independence reached New York, where they had, of course, a bunch of British naval ships were in the harbor. George Washington, he was the commander of the Continental Forces in New York, read the document out loud in front of City Hall. A raucous crowd cheered, the inspiring words, rioted, tore down the statue of King George III, and they melted it down and made 42,000 musket balls for the American Army, shooting them with his own statue. I thought that was pretty cool.
Yep, that's a great story.
All right. Anything else you got? Because I got a couple more, but I want to make sure it's your show.
Yeah, I've got a couple more things I want to read, and then we can do the last couple things of trivia. So the idea that the president can stand up and criticize the Supreme Court and criticize the institutions that have been founded through the Constitution and the ideals of the Declaration of Independence concern me. Mm-hmm. The idea that people are attacking this today, they are not learning about the Declaration of Independence, concerns me. And so I just want to read, this is the last quote I'm going to offer from Calvin Coolidge's speech. He says this: in its main features, the Declaration of Independence is a great spiritual document. It is a declaration not of material, but of spiritual conceptions: equality, liberty, popular sovereignty, the rights of man. These are not elements which we can see and touch. They are ideals. They have their source and their roots in the religious convictions. They belong to the unseen world. Unless the faith of the American people in these religious convictions is to endure, the principles of our declaration will perish. We cannot continue to enjoy the result if we neglect and abandon the cause. Yeah, you got to you've got to keep reminding people how powerful the Declaration of Independence is, how important it is that we have a constitution. All right.
Go for it.
I was going to read this next. So we got through halfway through the second paragraph of the Declaration of Independence. We talked about in the first paragraph, Thomas Jefferson tells the world we're about to do this. In the second paragraph, he starts off the first long sentence saying, this is what we're doing. We're explaining that we all have certain inalienable rights. And then he says, prudence indeed will dictate this, and that if governments don't support those rights, we can form our own government that will support those rights. But then he says, and this is important because people say today, well, we already had a revolution. Shouldn't we have the right to have another one or something like that? Prudence indeed will dictate that governments long established should not be changed for light and transient causes. And accordingly, all experience has shown that mankind are more disposed to suffer while evils are sufferable than to right themselves by abolishing the forms to which they are accustomed. But when a long train of abuses and usurpations, pursuing invariably the same object, evinces a design to reduce them to an absolute despotism, it is their right, it is their duty to throw off such government and to provide new guards for their future security. Such has been the patient sufferance of these colonies, and such is now the necessity which constrains them to alter their former systems of government. Now, I like that because he's setting a pretty high standard to say, if you're subject to tyranny, you don't. The right answer is not to have a revolution or form a new government. Eventually, it is, but you should try not to do that. You should try the long-standing forms of government should stand up. It goes back to what you and I, Matthew, have talked about. If there's a fence there, don't just tear it down because you don't know why it's there. Make sure you understand why it's there. If you're ever going to go try to tear a system down, you better know what you're doing. You better have a plan for the new one and why you're going to do it. Tearing stuff down for the sake of tearing stuff down, trying to have a revolution for the sake of revolution. Thomas Jefferson addressed it right there in our founding documents. It should be a really big deal to do that, and we should have a plan in place if we're going to do that.
Well, and that's if you go back to every time we don't like something, violence is the answer in the street and calling our neighbors extreme names and tearing down things. If you do that trivial thinking, well, the Constitution can withstand this. Yeah, it might be able to withstand it, but it's not setting good precedent. And that's not how you're supposed to work with your fellow Americans to control the government. That's the government controlling you as they siphon you off into little chambers and put you in your little pens, and then they pit you against each other.
Yeah.
So, hey, what do you want to do? I've got a couple more trivias, but I want to make sure we go fast.
Ask me your trivia.
I got a question. We didn't have a Navy back in when all this thing started. So how did we, until France got involved and the Dutch and all that later on in the war to battle the British forces in the Royal Navy, how did we handle the waters, sir? Because I know how, because I'm looking at it.
I don't know for sure, but I'm gonna make a guess to say that we granted privateers letters of marque in some instances.
They just third-partied it out to pirates.
Yeah, basically, grant a letter of marque basically turns you from a pirate into a privateer, and you actually have the permission from your government to go out and act like a pirate as only as you attack the other side.
The other side, yeah. Yep. All right, I got a question for you, Eric Buchanan. Okay. What was the oldest and the youngest person to sign the Declaration of Independence? I don't expect you to know this, but I expect you to take a good guess at it.
The youngest was 26 years old, and he was, golly, I can't remember his name, and I'm going to guess Benjamin Franklin was the oldest, but I'm not sure.
You suck out loud. You're horrible. Yes, you're right. Benjamin Franklin was the oldest at 70, and Edward Rutledge.
Edward Rutledge was
26. Man, alive. And last one for me, Eric Buchanan. Did you know there's something written on the back of the Declaration of Independence?
It's a map to the treasure chamber.
You got it. It's where all the the gold is. No, it's on the back of the original. It says original Declaration of Independence dated 4th July 1776, and they said that was probably because during war times, as it had to be moved about for safety reasons, that it was labeled so it would not just be thrown out or people knew where it was, which I think is pretty cool.
Yeah, that. So talking about having it moved around and stuff, where was it kept during World War II?
Fort Knox, baby.
Yeah, yeah.
Look at you trying to stump me. He's getting harder for him, boys and girls. I just wish people could see his face of disappointment. Like, damn it, Clint. Dang it. Or you might be proud. You might be proud that I'm learning from you, sir.
There you go. You're learning. You're learning.
I'm doing good. How else do you want to end this one today? Do you want to talk real quick about what this day means to you, or is there something else you want to read to us?
I just let me finish this up on the Declaration of Independence.
Please do.
So that was most of the first two paragraphs. The next sentence: the history of the present King of Great Britain is a history of repeated injuries and usurpations, all having in direct object the establishment of an absolute tyranny over the states. To prove this, let facts be submitted to a candid world. And then there is a list of a bunch. I don't even be able to count them. It's a lot of all the different things that the King of England and his Parliament really has done wrong, and to be a tyrant over the colonies. It's worth a read. And then there's some more language after that. I've read like the kind of the most important part I want to talk about today, but don't be sit down and read some of the stuff that basically those things that we consider as Americans to be tyranny. I think on that list, that's a fair way of coming up a list of things the government should not do.
Yeah, I'm going to say what I'm about to, and then we'll hand it off to you. You can end this for us. I'm going to let you tell everybody what this day means to you. I say this all the time in a very clumsy way, but I really mean it in my clumsy way. It comes from my heart, and that is, it is 100% accurate to sit back and point at all the things America has done wrong. We have evils in our past, like every other country. We've got to remember our history. But we are not just our history, and we are not just the worst of our history. Just like your family, your business, your church, no one is just the evils they do. At least most people aren't. There are evil people in history, but most countries are not just the evils they do. And we want our kids to have positive self-esteem. We want ourselves to have positive self-esteem, and our friends. And I don't know why we don't want that from our country and patriotism. And in my opinion, patriotism is being able to look back at your country and go, those are evil things. Those were bad things. We can do better. We are doing better. Let's move through it. And I will say this again. I don't think the world knew the port. You know, when you get your medicine, when you're really sick, they put a port in you. I've been at the age stage in life sometimes where they thought that we had to put ports in for different things. And a port just basically drills into your body, and that's where the medicine goes directly into the system. And I don't think the world knew the port of freedom that America was just sticking into history right then. I mean, it changed everything. It set it up for people to start having some self-realization of, you know what? Slavery is not good. You know what? Being controlled by tyranny is not the only way. And once that started and it sparked that human freedom, everybody started looking around going, we can do better. I can't do better right now, all of it, but we can move it forward just a little bit. And I'm going to end it with this saying that's why I think the country is the best country ever. I think we still have potential for that. And to all my progressive and conservative friends, I'm going to say something that Eric is tired of hearing. Progressing is only important if we're going in the right direction, and conserving is only good if we're bringing the right things with us. Ignoring either will make sure that we are not going to stay on track like we should be. And I think we're a great country, and we should all be proud to be an American, no matter what color you are or where you live in our country. Eric, you can wrap it up for us, sir.
Yeah. So one of the things that I have said to friends now, it's probably been for 15 or 20 years, I've noticed that America is losing its shared mythology. And this is one of the things that I'm most concerned about, that we as Americans no longer have a common consensus about the founding fathers being great people. We no longer have a common consensus about the greatness of the founding documents and what the Constitutional Declaration of Independence means. I think what I've learned the more I dig into it is there are still a lot of people who believe in those things. And there are people of all political persuasions that generally believe in those things. We might have small disagreements. I think there is a small percentage of people that want to change that want to change the perception of America, and that they have an undue influence in certain areas. And what worries me is especially in education. that kids today, I read an article today where somebody, a Cuban immigrant from the 1960s, was proud to be an American, and he claimed the heritage of the founding fathers, even though he was born outside the United States, but now he's a U.S. citizen. He says that their heritage is my heritage. The American heritage is now my heritage because I'm a U.S. citizen. It's the only country in the world that by becoming a citizen, that I get to claim that same heritage that everybody who was born here gets to claim. And by God, that's what it means to be an American. And then he says, frustratingly, I asked my 5-year-old grandson what he knew about George Washington. The answer was, well, he owned slaves.
Yep.
And that's all the kid knows. Our education system, there's something wrong if we are not also, we can teach kids that.
And we should know the evils of our country. Absolutely.
We can teach kids about the history of slavery, but we should also know that George Washington sacrificed the vast majority of his adulthood working for this country, that he established those principles we talked about earlier in the podcast about the civilian control of government, about the peaceful transition of power in the presidency, the idea that the president shouldn't serve more than 2 terms, that the role of the presidency is what it is. He established all those things. He was the father of our country in so many ways, and if it wasn't for him, we could have slid into dictatorship. We could have slid into becoming a kingdom if he hadn't behaved the way that he had. And kids today need to know that. They need to know who Thomas Jefferson is. They need to know who Ben Franklin is, James Madison, James Monroe. And if they're not learning those things, I think it's part of our responsibility to do whatever we can to make sure those things are changed. I don't mean for it to be only the good sides. We should pay attention to the bad sides. But one other thing we should also pay attention to is, just because we didn't let women vote or that we had slavery back then, those were horrible things, but nobody else did either. Look around the planet in 1776 and tell me where you would rather be a woman. Tell me where they had more rights. That the world that existed in 1776, we were the shining light of these ideals and these principles, and we've fought long and hard for 246 years to ensure that everybody has those rights in the United States, that everybody follows those principles. And now that we're getting close to that, it applies to everybody of every race, everybody of every sex. They apply to all Americans. Now it seems to be this trend that we're going to poo-poo these great ideas,
go backwards,
that we're going to try to bury these ideas with using this propaganda machine, that it was all bad from the beginning. And that's something that very much concerns me. But what gives me plenty of hope is I still think the majority of people understand how important these principles are. And the 4th of July is the day that a lot of people can come together to celebrate that. And whether you agree that America's mostly great, almost all great, or only sometimes great, let's start with that conversation and make sure we do talk about those things and why it's great and what our great future looks like if we live up to those principles.
Yeah. And something I have learned from you in these podcasts is that the things we put in place has allowed us to move forward in a slow, sometimes painful manner. That's how you want it when you have 300 or 200, whatever time. When you have a bunch of people living together, you want change to be kind of slow, because if not, it can slide into going in bad directions and you can't stop it. You don't want it to get the momentum of going in a bad direction. So things are put in place to make sure the checks and balances move us along slowly. And again, times it's gone great, sometimes it's gone slow, but it's moving forward. And that's what we should be proud of. Hey, Eric, thanks for serving our country, sir.
Oh, I appreciate that. Thank you, Clint. Thanks for doing this show with me.
July.
Happy 4th of July. Happy Independence Day.
All right. You ready to rock on?
Happy birthday, America. Yep.
There you go. You ended it with